headlines. Washington defends the possible deployment of a U.S. missile system to South Korea and brushes off Beijing's resistance. It's a challenging week for Seoul in its diplomatic maneuver between the two superpowers. President Park Geun-hye meets with the heads of the rival political parties. The president calls for bipartisan support for economic revival, while the opposition leader calls her policies a failure. And we meet Korea's so-called active seniors who are living life post-retirement and spending money along the way. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. Officials from China and the United States are holding back-to-back talks with South Korea this week. In today's meeting with Seoul Foreign Ministry officials, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell commented on a Chinese official's remarks from yesterday. Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
Just a day after China voiced concerns over the possible deployment of a THAAD missile defense system in South Korea, the United States said China doesn't have a say in the matter.
Well, I find it curious that a third country would presume to make strong representations about a security system that has not been put in place and that is still a matter of theory.
Chinese Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs Liu Jianchao told reporters in Seoul on Monday that China hopes South Korea will consider Beijing's concerns before deploying the U.S.-led missile defense system. Beijing is against the deployment over concerns that the radar system, which can cover 1,000 kilometers, could be used to monitor mainland China. But following talks with senior South Korean officials in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell said THAAD is purely for countering North Korean threats and that its deployment is up to South Korea.
It is for the Republic of Korea to decide what measures it will take in its own alliance defense and when.
South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se echoed Russell's words while speaking to reporters, but added there were no official talks about THAAD deployment.
As for THAAD, there is currently no development. The government will consider all factors, including security, before reaching a decision that will maximize our national interest.
But as the foreign ministry teeters between Seoul's closest partners, the defense ministry was much more blunt, saying that neighboring countries should not weigh in on South Korea's security policy. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And North Korea had something to say about this issue as well. It's blamed the United States for stoking tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea's ruling Workers' Party newspaper, the Nodong Sinmun, said Tuesday that Washington is trying to become a main strategic power in the Asia-Pacific region by building up its military presence. And here's another tough decision for South Korea to make in its diplomatic maneuver between China and the United States, and that is whether to join a new China-led regional bank. There are many pros, but the one con is a possible dent in Seoul-Washington relations. Connie Kim reports.
South Korea is stuck in between the United States and China and must decide whether to join the new China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Aimed at creating a new financial order centered around China, the AIIB was launched last year to provide project loans to developing nations and promote economic growth. But it stands opposed by the U.S. as it believes Beijing should use the bank for political purposes. During talks in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell spoke with senior South Korean officials to convey Washington's concerns and called on China to ensure transparency for the new financial institution. Those who take a cautious stance say South Korea joining the AIIB could be a stumbling block in strong South Korea-U.S. alliance as it goes against the U.S.-dominated Asian Development Bank. A professor at Seoul National University says Seoul should expand its share in the AIIB to expand its decision-making role. Supporters of Korea becoming a founding member of the AIIB say it would be a win for Seoul economically and politically.
Washington and Japan are the biggest shareholders in the Asian Development Bank, so Korea would have very little decision-making power. If South Korea joins the AIIB, Seoul will have a greater chance of participating in infrastructure projects for developing countries in Asia.
Looking ahead, analysts also say Seoul's participation in the regional bank could help secure stabilization funds and capital for building infrastructure post-reunification. With Korea mulling over whether to join the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, experts here are calling for a diplomatic strategy that doesn't favor either Washington or Beijing, but that's in Korea's best national interest. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
North Korea is believed to be the culprit behind recent data leaks from South Korea's nuclear power plants. An interim probe by South Korean authorities found that malicious codes used in the cyber attacks were similar to those traditionally used by North Korea, and the IP addresses used were based in the north. Last year, a group of hackers leaked documents about the facilities, and last week they released additional files and demanded money in return for not selling the information to other countries. A UN special rapporteur on North Korea has called for an investigation into the many North Koreans working abroad in what he characterized as slave-like conditions. A Seoul-based human rights group says the workers are forced to make foreign currency for the cash-strapped Kim Jong-un regime. Shin Se-min tells us more.
The United Nations human rights investigator for North Korea said he will look into allegations that 20,000 North Koreans are working in slave-like conditions in countries like China, Russia, and the Middle East. Marzuki Daruzman, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, told Reuters the workers are, quote, bonded laborers or slave laborers who receive poor compensation for working long hours. NK Watch, a Seoul-based human rights group, says roughly 100,000 workers are sent overseas to 40 countries and make some $3 billion in foreign currency every year for the Kim Jong-un regime. There was no reason given for the discrepancy in the estimated numbers of workers. The human rights group also called for an investigation into host countries' involvement in the program. This isn't the first time the practice has surfaced. Activists say North Korea has been using its manpower to make money for the Kim regime since the 1980s, with some of the money being spent on luxury goods. But the practice has been accelerating under the current leadership as the number of North Korean workers abroad is said to have increased by 35,000 since 2012, based on figures from the New York Times and NK Watch. Activists say the practice may have increased because of tighter international sanctions on the regime that have prompted it to seek new sources of revenue. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye has asked the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties for their cooperation in ensuring the implementation of deals signed with Middle Eastern countries during a recent trip there. This to help revive the local economy and to benefit the Korean people and companies. Staying with the economy, both parties agreed on the need to reform the public employee pension system, while opposition leader Moon Jae-in said his party does not take the reform deadline of May 2nd lightly. He did add that it's important to get all sides to agree on the final reform plan. The two sides, however, differed on the ways to raise the minimum wage in the country. In a likely move to open external communication, President Park has agreed to meet both party leaders on a regular basis. Gone are the days when candidates campaigned with posters and leaflets. Now they're jumping on the social media bandwagon to draw in potential young supporters. Kwon So-ah takes a look.
As Korea's rival parties gear up for April's by-elections, they're trying to win the hearts of young voters through novel campaign methods than the usual posters and leaflets. This teaser shows a young unemployed man complaining about a situation. when suddenly the ruling Saenuri Party's chairman appears in front of him.
괜찮아요. 많이 놀랬죠?
It's an advertisement for an application naming contest. It's hoped the app will boost young people's participation in the political process. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is using webtoons as a means of explaining hot political issues in an easy-to-digest way.
We're doing this in an effort to not let complicated policies be discussed only at the National Assembly, but to connect with young voters.
Due to high social network service penetration, these video clips and digital comics spread quickly, making it easier for the parties to spread their vision to the younger generation. But there are concerns about whether this is the best way to go about campaigning.
When young people look at content on SNS or webtoons, they simply enjoy it and they don't take it that seriously. That's why there needs to be a more thorough understanding of cultural phenomena and young people's opinions, especially when the subject matter is so heavy and important.
Some say that rather than focusing too much on how to make themselves more likable, the parties should come up with practical strategies to tackle the biggest problems facing young people in Korea, such as the high youth unemployment rate. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Samsung Electronics has announced a new strategy for helping businesses adapt in the era of the Internet of Things, which is a phenomenon where everything we touch or interact with is connected to the World Wide Web. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has laid out a new strategy for helping businesses integrate the Internet of Things into their operations. It's providing business-to-business solutions in various areas, including retail, education, hospitality, healthcare, finance, and transportation. At the CEBIC Computer Expo in Hanover on Monday, the company's president and chief marketing officer, Hong Won-pyo, announced the creation of Samsung Business. He says the brand will help businesses boost productivity with tailored solutions for saving energy and inventory management. Samsung Business will unify previous B2B solutions, including its Knox security platform and a smart signage display system to help enterprises adopt the Internet of Things. Hong added, though, that the company needs to overcome major challenges to accelerate IoT adoption, namely platform compatibility, data analysis, and security. Until now, the tech giant's IoT services have targeted the average consumer with smart health and smart home devices. The company is also trying to gain a competitive advantage in the sector through the faster connectivity. It set a goal of connecting all of its products and devices by 2020 with a fifth-generation network, which is 1,000 times faster than 4G LTE. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government's policy changes and the central bank's key rate cut are all aimed at generating momentum for Korea's economic recovery, but most indicators are still pointing to a slowing economy. Some fear that Korea will log a sixth straight 0% range growth in the first quarter of this year. Song Ji-sun has more.
It's barely managing to hover above zero. The Korean economy is likely to log another 0% range growth for a sixth straight quarter, inching closer to a 9-quarter record logged between 2011 and 2013. Oil prices may be cheap, but domestic consumption is not catching up, and real economic indicators are showing the telltale signs of a slowing economy. Mining and manufacturing production shrunk at the fastest rate in 6 years in January, and consumer inflation is also hovering at the 0% range for the third straight month. If the first quarter marks expansion of less than 1%, the Korean economy is likely to settle in the low 3% growth range for the whole of 2015. Foreign investment banks have already downwardly revised their outlook, with some predicting growth in the 2% range. Domestic research institutes are also reportedly ready to adjust their figures. After slashing the key interest rate to an all-time low of 1.75% last week, Korea's central bank also hinted that its 3.4% growth outlook will be downgraded in its next forecast in April. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Being a college graduate is often considered a great privilege, but these days it's not always the case, especially when it comes to getting a job in Korea. New research shows that more college graduates are out of work compared to high school grads. While the unemployment rate for high school graduates dropped 0.2 percentage point from 2005 to around 9% last year, the rate rose for college grads from 6% to nearly 10%. Analysts say this is due to the lack of quality jobs for college graduates to go after, while employers are choosing to hire more workers fresh out of high school. Life begins at 50 or even at 60 for some, thanks to medical advancements and a growing interest in health and fitness. A growing number of people in Korea are staying more active, even in what was once considered to be old age. That means the country's soon-to-be seniors are becoming one of Korea's major consumer groups. Kim Min-ji has the story.
After working 20 years at an insurance company, Byung Young-do now spends most of his time outdoors. He's taken up photography as a hobby and even invested $500 in a new camera.
I'm living for myself, doing the things I've always wanted to do. I don't have any debt or major bills, so I spend about a third of my monthly allowance on myself.
Byun is one of the country's so-called active seniors.
In Korea, active seniors are people that are socially and economically active and willing to spend money to improve the quality of their lives.
Unlike generations before them, a growing number of Koreans in their 50s and 60s aren't relying on their children for financial support. They are independent and have disposable incomes. And they're spending big on leisure activities and buying up items like cameras, art supplies, and outdoor gear, and even paying for continued education.
Now that my children are grown up, I have time to spend my money and enjoy my own life. I play the guitar and take singing lessons.
So what's made them different from their predecessors?
Many members of the baby boomer generation are well educated, had good paying jobs, and were able to save up. They were the main consumers during Korea's industrialization period and have more interest in leisure, fashion, and health than seniors of the past.
Data shows consumers aged 50 to 64 spent $40 billion in 2010, and in 5 years, their buying power is expected to triple. Experts say this comes as more than 80% of them return to the job market after retirement to pursue the work they were passionate about when they were younger. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Voting is underway in Israel's general election, which has been described as a tight race between Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling camp and the central-left opposition. Paul Lee is joining us from the News Center. Paul, the political campaigns running up to this vote were quite intense, to say the least, and it looks like Netanyahu's last-ditch efforts even caught international headlines.
That's right. Whether it was a strategic move or a show of panic, the incumbent Israeli prime minister made a huge election promise at the 11th hour, which may have wide implications for the international community. Addressing a rally of supporters ahead of Tuesday's election, Benjamin Netanyahu vowed that he would not allow the creation of a Palestinian state if he was re-elected. He also said that conceding any land to the Palestinians would leave Israel vulnerable to attacks by Islamic extremists. Netanyahu's Likud party has doubled down on security issues, a move political watchers say may prove disastrous as socioeconomic issues emerged as voters' top concern.
Even the security issue, which seems to be advantageous to Netanyahu, has been criticized by former leaders of the country's security services, Mossad and Shin Bet. This has posed another negative impact on Netanyahu's support rates. Some insiders of the right-wing group are also bored of him and want him to lose.
Meanwhile, the center-left Zionist Union, led by former Justice Minister Isaac Herzog, has pledged to repair ties with the Palestinians and engage the international community. Latest polls forecast that the opposition coalition will take 24 to 26 seats in the 120-member parliament. compared to only 20 to Netanyahu's Likud party.
And turning now to Russia, after an 11-day absence, President Vladimir Putin is back in the public eye, and there were rumors that the Russian leader was critically ill or even deposed. What did he have to say about all this?
Well, he dismissed and even laughed off the rumors as simple gossip, but there still hasn't been any word from the Kremlin regarding Putin's unexplained absence. And as you mentioned, it's all been fueling rumors. Speculation even went so far to suggest that he was overthrown by the military. The 62-year-old leader returned to view on Monday as he met with the president of Kyrgyzstan near St. Petersburg. It was his first public appearance since March 5th. Marking his return in a show of force, Russia's Northern Fleet in the Arctic launched military drills of, quote, full combat readiness, moving action some 40,000 troops as well as dozens of warships. Meanwhile, the European Union reiterated on Monday that it would stick to its policy of not legitimizing what it called Russia's illegal takeover of Crimea. This as Crimea is marking the first anniversary since Russia's annexation of the Ukrainian peninsula.
And shifting gears now, Paul, China's e-commerce giant Alibaba is making waves in the tech industry as it's shown off its latest security feature for consumers, and it's one that takes advantage of the face recognition technology. I am very much intrigued. Do tell us more.
Well, Alibaba's CEO Jack Ma demoed the new tech during a presentation on Sunday. He said it was a new project that his company was working on called Alipay, and it will allow smartphone users to make secure transactions, buy online goods, all with a scan of their face, doing away with what he called cumbersome passwords. Now, this follows a growing trend for payment services among IT companies. Jack Ma made the announcement at the International Computer Fair CeBIT in Hanover, Germany. Now, he joins the more than 600 Chinese companies that are taking part in the event, which are showing off a new wave of services and gadgets.
China is a huge player in the global economy, and therefore, not surprisingly, everybody wants to participate in China's economic vitality. The influence, however, is going to be somewhat mixed at the company level, and we're going to have to see how management at the individual company determines how it wants to play the Chinese story.
On the sidelines of the International Expo, Chinese Vice Premier Ma Kai met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel to deepen bilateral cooperation in innovation, finance, and manufacturing.
And finally, Paul, Britain's Prince Harry has officially announced that he will retire from the armed forces in June. This is quite a surprise to many, considering that he was reportedly seeking a much broader role in the military.
Yeah, it's definitely unexpected. Just a few months ago, there were media reports that the UK's top military brass was grooming Prince Harry to become the first royal general. But whatever the reason, he appears to have had a change of heart. Kensington Palace made the announcement through a statement on Monday. The grandson of Queen Elizabeth described it as a tough choice and said that he's considering options for the future. The 30-year-old captain is leaving the military after a decade-long service that included 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. After confirming his decision, Prince Harry said that he's looking forward to a new chapter in his life. Charity?
All right, Paul, thank you so much for those updates, and we will see you again in our next broadcast.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather outlook. We begin with news of microdust advisories that were issued earlier today. Now, that has been lifted, but higher than normal levels continue to linger in most regions, including Seoul. At the moment, we are under cloudy skies, and showers are set to hit areas down south later tonight before spreading nationwide. So, heavy rainfall of up to 80 millimeters will drench the southern regions. This possibly accompanied by stormy conditions, while 5 to 10 millimeters is expected for the capital. So hopefully this round of precipitation will provide the much needed humidity to the air, as dry weather alert continues to be in effect for the eastern coast of Gangwon province, where humidity levels are down in the low 20s. On to tomorrow's readings. Seoul reaches a high of 15, Gwangju 16, Busan 13. Meanwhile, Jeju peaks at 20, Dokdo 10, and snow is expected on Mount Kumgang. Pyongyang. Those are the updates I have for you now. I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Bo Kyung. And that does it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.